My parents charged me rent while my sister lived free, so I bought my own house in cash. My name is Ashley, and at 24 years old, the envelope sat beside my breakfast plate like a time bomb wrapped in pristine white paper. My name was typed in bold black letters, scented and sterile. No handwriting, no warmth, just corporate precision that made my stomach drop. Dad didn't even glance up from his scrambled eggs when I tore it open. $2,000 a month, he announced like he was discussing the weather forecast. Covers your room, utilities, internet, and household expenses. I stared at the itemized breakdown. Base rent, $1,100. Utilities, $350. Household contribution, $550. At the bottom, in unforgiving black ink, due on the 1st of each month. Late fees, $75 after the 5th. Across from me, my younger sister Brooklyn twirled her French toast, her freshly manicured nails catching the morning light. Her phone leaned against her orange juice glass, playing some TikTok dance tutorial. She hadn't acknowledged the envelope, hadn't even looked up from her screen. But Brooklyn doesn't, I started. Brooklyn's still finding her path, Mom interrupted smoothly, her voice carrying that practiced patience she used with difficult customers at her boutique. You've got 2 steady jobs, Ashley. You're established. It's time you learned real adult responsibility. I wanted to laugh, but the sound stuck in my throat. Established? I worked 40 hours a week at First National Bank as a teller, then rushed across town to wait tables at Romano's Italian kitchen until closing. I hadn't taken a weekend off in 4 months. I bought my own groceries, did my own laundry, and still lived in the bedroom I'd painted lavender when I was 12. I looked at the invoice again, each number feeling like a personal attack. When does this start? Next Monday, Dad replied, finally meeting my eyes. We know you can handle it. Mom's coffee cup clinked against her saucer. And just so we're clear, late payments come with penalties. That's how the real world works, sweetheart. I nodded because arguing felt pointless. I folded the paper carefully, slipped it into my purse, and excused myself before the burning in my chest could crack something open. Upstairs, I opened my laptop and checked my checking account. Not impressive, but not empty either. I stared at the screen for a long time, listening to Brooklyn's laughter floating up from the kitchen. Then I opened a new Excel spreadsheet, labeled it Household Expenses, and started typing. The first column, date. The second, amount paid. The third, what Brooklyn contributed. That third column would stay empty for a very long time. But I was learning a lesson, just not the one they thought they were teaching. By the end of my first week as a paying tenant, I'd worked 5 bank shifts and 4 dinner shifts at Romano's. My feet ached from standing on marble floors and racing between tables. My wrists were sore from carrying heavy trays loaded with pasta bowls and wine glasses. When I dragged myself home Friday night, Brooklyn was sprawled across our living room couch wearing my old Northwestern University hoodie like it belonged to her. The TV played some reality dating show, and scattered across the coffee table were Amazon packages, all addressed to me but clearly not ordered by me. Brooklyn, I said, holding up a box of expensive skincare products. Did you use my credit card again? She didn't even pause her show. You said I could that one time. That was 6 months ago, and it was for textbooks. She shrugged, finally looking at me with those wide green eyes that had gotten her out of trouble our entire lives. Well, you never changed your password. I stood there waiting for an apology, for some acknowledgement that using someone's credit card without permission was wrong. Instead, she turned back to the TV where some guy was explaining why he deserved a rose. Mom appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. What's all the noise about? She's still using my credit card, I said quietly. Mom sighed like I just told her the dishwasher was making that weird noise again. Ashley, Brooklyn's trying to figure out her future. You're the one with stable income. Why not help each other instead of keeping score? The words hit me like a slap. They didn't see it as theft. They saw it as expected. Natural. I earned, Brooklyn spent, and somehow that was family harmony in their eyes. That night, I sat cross-legged on my bed and scrolled through my bank statements. There were charges I didn't recognize: Sephora, Netflix Premium, HelloFresh meal kits, Uber Eats orders that arrived when I was at work. All of them billed to the card linked to our family account. I opened my spreadsheet and added a new tab, Brooklyn's charges. Then I opened another browser window and typed, How to dispute an authorized credit card use family member. I stared at the search results for a long time. Then I closed that tab and opened a new one. How to open high-yield savings account different bank. I opened the account the next Tuesday during my lunch break, not at First National where too many people knew me, but at Pioneer Credit Union across town. I used my personal email, set up a P.O. box for statements, and funded it with my quarterly performance bonus, $800. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A quiet start. 2 weeks later, I was counting deposits at my teller window when my coworker Jake leaned over the partition with his usual crooked grin. "You look like you're planning someone's funeral." "Maybe I am," I muttered, organizing 20s into neat stacks. He raised an eyebrow, and something about his expression made me spill everything. The rent invoice, Brooklyn's shopping sprees, the unspoken rules that governed our house where I paid for everything and she paid for nothing. "Want to see something interesting?" Jake asked, pulling up the county assessor's website on his computer. "Your parents refinanced last year." His fingers flew across the keyboard. "And according to this, they're 3 months behind on payments." I blinked. "But I've been paying rent." "They're not teaching you responsibility," he said quietly. "They're keeping their house with your paycheck." That evening, I stared at my spreadsheet again. Below household contribution, I added a new line in bold red, mortgage payment. Then I typed, "This isn't about growing up. This is about keeping them afloat." I saved 2 copies, one on my laptop, one in the cloud, and labeled the folder documentation. I lay back on my bed, trying to calculate how long it would take to save enough to move out. The numbers were daunting, the timeline depressingly long. But I wasn't just working anymore. I was recording. And recording, I was beginning to understand, could be its own form of power. Jake had planted a seed that afternoon, and by the time I fell asleep, it had already begun to grow. If they wanted to treat our relationship like a business transaction, maybe it was time I started thinking like a businesswoman. The next morning, I opened a new browser tab and searched, First-Time Home Buyer Programs Pennsylvania. Then another, How to Buy Real Estate Through LLC. I was done being their safety net. It was time to build my own. It started with Jake sliding his phone across the breakroom table during our lunch break. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a real estate listing. "Foreclosure, 3-bedroom ranch, Maple Heights neighborhood. Owners desperate, priced way under market." I expected a disaster, but the photos showed hardwood floors, updated windows, and even a small deck overlooking a fenced backyard. It wasn't a dream home, but it looked possible. "I can't afford a house," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Jake shrugged. "Not today, maybe. But you've been saving, right?" I nodded slowly. My secret account had grown steadily. Every tip from Romano's, every overtime hour from the bank, every dollar I could squeeze from my budget went straight into that account. It wasn't enough for a mansion, but maybe enough for a foothold. That night, after my restaurant shift, I stayed up until 3 a.m. researching everything I could find. How to purchase property through an LLC. Ways to keep real estate transactions private. Protecting your identity in public records. By morning, I had a plan. Margaret Chen, a longtime bank customer and semi-retired real estate agent, met me at Starbucks on Wednesday morning. She'd always been kind, asking about my college plans and remembering my birthday. When I explained what I needed, she didn't judge or lecture. "We'll set up a simple LLC," she said, stirring cream into her latte. "You'll be the sole member, but your name won't appear on the purchase documents. Just the company name." "What should I call it?" She smiled. "What do you want this to represent?" I thought about the rent invoice, Brooklyn's careless spending, the way my parents had turned family into a business. Liberation Properties LLC. "I like that," she said. "Strong. Clear." The paperwork moved surprisingly fast. Jake helped me organize my financial documents. Margaret handled the legal filings. Within 2 weeks, I had a folder labeled Liberation Properties LLC and a business checking account. Each night, I packed a few more items, winter clothes, books, photo albums, and stored them at a mini storage facility near the bank. Nobody at home noticed my closet getting emptier or my bookshelf looking sparse. Brooklyn was too busy with her Instagram stories, and my parents assumed I was just tired from work. They weren't wrong. I was exhausted. But for the first time in months, the exhaustion felt purposeful. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was planning. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday. I'd chosen that day carefully. Brooklyn had her pottery class, which she attended sporadically but never missed completely. Mom's garden club met at the community center. Dad played tennis with his college buddies at the country club. I'd timed it perfectly. By the time they came home, I'd be gone. I chose Thursday, March 15th. The date felt significant somehow, the Ides of March, the day that changed everything for Caesar. It seemed fitting. Everyone had left by 9 a.m. Brooklyn to her pottery class that she'd stick with for another 2 weeks before finding a new hobby. Mom to her garden club where they'd spend more time gossiping than planning flower beds. Dad to tennis where he'd complain about his backhand and reminisce about high school. Jake helped me load the final boxes into his Honda Pilot. The rest of my belongings, everything that mattered, fit neatly into my own Jeep Cherokee. I'd been gradually moving things out for weeks, and nobody had noticed. I left my house key on my dresser where they'd find it eventually. On the kitchen table, I placed a single sheet of paper, folded once. The outside read simply, Ashley. Inside, as of today, I am moving out. Rent will no longer be paid to this address. All utilities and services in my name will be disconnected by 5 p.m. Please forward any mail to the address on file with the bank. No emotions. No explanations. Just facts, delivered the way they delivered my rent invoice. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. The house smelled like Mom's vanilla candles and the lavender fabric softener she'd used for years. Brooklyn's art supplies were scattered across the counter from some project she'd abandon by next week. The refrigerator displayed my old honor roll certificates and Brooklyn's participation ribbons from middle school activities. I shut the front door behind me without looking back. In the car, I pulled out my phone and went through my contacts systematically. Mom, blocked. Dad, blocked. Brooklyn, blocked. The family group chat, left and blocked. The silence that followed was immediate and profound, like turning off a radio that had been playing static in the background of my life for years. Later that afternoon, Margaret called. Your offer was accepted, she said. Liberation Properties LLC officially owns 847 Maple Heights Drive. Keys are ready for pickup. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel of my parked car and closed my eyes. Not relief yet, that would come later. But the quiet satisfaction of knowing the exit wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was real. It was mine. That night, I slept in my new house for the first time. No Brooklyn's late-night phone calls bleeding through the walls. No Dad's morning news shows at full volume. No Mom's reminder lists taped to my door. Just silence. Beautiful, earned silence. They found me faster than I expected. The foreclosure notice must have arrived that Tuesday morning, a crisp white envelope from Liberation Properties LLC addressed to current residents. Margaret had texted me a photo of Mom standing in the driveway, pale and shaking, holding the letter like it might burst into flames. By evening, they were at my door. I watched through the peephole as they approached. Dad in his golf polo, jaw clenched tight. Mom wringing her hands, her garden club pearls catching the porch light. Brooklyn trailing behind them, arms crossed, looking like this was the biggest inconvenience of her life. I opened the door halfway, positioning myself in the threshold. Ashley, Mom began, her voice artificially bright. We got this strange letter about the house. Some company took over the mortgage. We think there's been a mistake. There hasn't been, I said calmly. Dad's eyes narrowed. You know anything about Liberation Properties? I do. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Mom glanced nervously at Brooklyn. Honey, Brooklyn's going to need somewhere to stay while we sort this out. Just temporarily. You've always been so responsible with money. I nodded thoughtfully. Sure. The guest room is $2,000 a month. First month and security deposit due up front. Late fees apply after the 5th. Brooklyn's head snapped toward me. Are you insane? Not at all, I replied. I learned from the best teachers. Dad's face flushed red. This isn't a game, Ashley. We're your family. I tilted my head. So was I when you handed me an itemized invoice and called it character building. Mom's voice cracked. We didn't mean. I know exactly what you meant, I said. And I learned the lesson perfectly. I stepped back inside and closed the door. Their voices carried through the wood, not yelling, not pounding, just the hollow sound of people who had suddenly lost all their leverage. I stood still for a moment, listening. Then I walked to my laptop and opened the folder labeled Property Management. I created a new document, Tenant Interaction Log, Visit Number 1. They hadn't been invited. But they'd shown up anyway. Just like I knew they would. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee as the morning sun streamed through windows that belonged to me. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was full of possibility. Jake stopped by sometimes with his easy laugh and terrible dad jokes. My college friend Nina dragged me out for trivia nights when she thought I was becoming too much of a hermit. I wasn't lonely. For the first time in years, I was free. The rent payments arrived like clockwork every month, transferred electronically to Liberation Properties LLC. Always on time now, never early. The business had grown too. Margaret had helped me acquire 2 more small properties, both from families facing foreclosure. I wasn't getting rich, but I was building something real. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Then I realized it was Brooklyn, messaging from a new account since I'd blocked her original one. Got a job at the mall. Manager position. Thanks for the reference. I'd forgotten I'd listed myself as a reference when she applied at Victoria's Secret last month. I'd given her a glowing recommendation without hesitation. Success wasn't zero-sum, and she was still my sister, even if we weren't speaking. I typed back, "Congratulations. Proud of you." She responded immediately, "Can we talk sometime?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I wrote, "Maybe. But not yet." That evening, I pulled out the canvas I'd been working on, my first painting in 3 years. It showed a house at sunset, but instead of looking warm and inviting, it looked like what it was, a business transaction. Sharp lines, cold colors, windows that reflected nothing back. In the corner, barely visible unless you looked closely, was a small figure walking away toward a brighter horizon. I stepped back from the easel, paint still wet on my brush. Tomorrow I'd add more details, maybe some wildflowers growing through cracks in the sidewalk, or birds flying toward that distant light. But tonight, I simply stood in the quiet of my own space, surrounded by the life I'd built from their lessons in survival. The silence wasn't the absence of their voices anymore. It was the presence of mine. And for the first time since that white envelope arrived at breakfast, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving.